Hello, friends. Today we're going to start with Chapter 8.1, Energy and Life, as we start our topic of photosynthesis. Homeostasis is hard work. Remember, homeostasis is the word I told you to remember. It means to maintain a stable internal environment. Organisms and cells within them have to grow and develop, move materials around, build new materials, and respond to environmental changes. If you remember, those are the characteristics of life. So what powers so much activity? Where does that power come from? I'll tell you. It comes from the mighty mitochondria. That's right, the mighty mitochondria. That organelle we talked about when we talked about the parts of the cell. Remember, the mitochondria takes the food that we eat and turns it into energy. Now, energy is ATP, and we're going to talk about that. Why is ATP useful to cells? ATP can release and store energy by breaking and then reforming the bonds between its phosphate groups. This characteristic of ATP makes it exceptionally useful as a basic energy source for all cells. Energy is the ability to do work or cause change. Your cells are busy using energy to build new molecules, contract muscles, and carry out active transport. Remember when we talked about the cell membrane, how you go against the concentration gradient? You got to use active transport to get things in and out of the cell membrane. Without the ability to obtain and use energy, life would cease to exist. One of the most important compounds that cells use to store and release energy is adenosine triphosphate, ATP. Always remember, ATP equals energy. One more time, ATP equals energy. ATP consists of adenine, 5-carbon sugar named ribose, and 3 phosphate groups. And we'll talk more about that. That's very important. ATP equals energy. Adenosine diphosphate, means there's only 2 phosphates, not 3. So adenosine diphosphate looks almost like ATP, except it has 2 phosphate groups instead of 3. ADP contains some energy, but not as much as ATP. When a cell has energy available, it can store small amounts of it by adding a phosphate group to ADP, producing ATP. So ADP only has 2 phosphate groups, but if we add another phosphate on, it becomes ATP. So if you look here, ADP is like a battery waiting to be charged. It can be charged, it can be, turned into energy. And then when you add that phosphate, whoopoo, it becomes charged. ADP, like I said, is like a rechargeable battery that powers the machinery of the cell. Cells can release the energy stored in the ADP by breaking down the bond between the 2nd and 3rd phosphate group. So here we go, between here. This is 1st, 2nd, 3rd. When that bond's breaking, we got energy. Because a cell can add or subtract these phosphate groups, it has an efficient way of storing and releasing energy as needed. And here's a good picture I made. ATP versus ADP. So if you look over here, there's ADP, right? We have the adenosine, we have the ribose, and we have 2 phosphates. And this is like the battery half charged. But when we add the phosphate onto the ADP, guess what it becomes now? It becomes ATP, okay? And now the battery's fully charged, ready to release energy. So ATP equals energy. And what makes this ATP? The mighty mitochondria. One way cells use the energy provided by ATP is to carry out active transport. Again, we're talking about in the cell membrane. Active transport, needing power to get things in and out of the cell with those protein pumps. Many cell membranes contain sodium-potassium pumps. ATP provides the energy that keeps these pumps working, maintaining a balance of ions on both sides of the cell membrane. ATP powers movement, providing the energy for motor proteins that contract muscle and power the movement of the cilia and the flagella. Remember the cilia? We talked about that in the low hairs and the flagella, that whip-like tail. Now, energy from ATP powers the creation of proteins and responses to chemical signals at the cell surface. So remember we talked about ribosomes make protein? Well, they need energy to do that, okay? They need energy to do that. ATP is not a good molecule for storing large amounts of energy over a long term. It is more efficient for cells to keep only a small supply of ATP on hand. Cells can regenerate ATP from ADP as needed by using the energy in food. So we don't have to store a lot of ATP. We can just make it when we eat food, or the mitochondria can. What happens during the process of photosynthesis? In the process of photosynthesis, plants convert the energy of sunlight into chemical energy stored in the bonds of carbohydrates or sugars. Organisms that obtain food by consuming other living things are known as heterotrophs. We're heterotrophs. Turtles are heterotrophs. Giraffes are heterotrophs. Cows are heterotrophs. If we need to eat things to get our energy, we are heterotrophs. Some heterotrophs get their food by eating plants. Other heterotrophs, such as the cheetah, obtain food from plants indirectly by feeding on the plant-eating animals. We both. Still, other heterotrophs, such as mushrooms, obtain food by decomposing other organisms. Organisms that make their own food, like plants and some bacteria, are called autotrophs. Remember, auto means self. Troph means to, eat. Plants, algae, and some bacteria are able to use light energy from the sun to produce food. The process by which the autotrophs use energy of sunlight to produce high-energy carbohydrates that can be used for food is known as photosynthesis. Photo, light, synthesis means to create. And here's our last slide. Autotrophs and heterotrophs. So what's an example of heterotrophs that can't make their own food? Well, we have animals like this giraffe, we have fungi like this mushroom, and we have some bacteria. But who can make their own food, or what can make their own food? Of course, plants and some bacteria. So bacteria fills on both categories, depending on what kind of bacteria you are, and some proteins. Okay? Guys, we're getting started with photosynthesis. This is 8.1. Again, we're done with this lesson. So remember, have fun and enjoy learning.